I want to welcome everyone to the inaugural episode of Leaders in Conversation, where we explore humanness at work with big-hearted leaders in conversations that build clarity to solve some of today's business challenges. I am your co-host, Ken Blackwell, and I'm joined by my other co-host.
Oh, Amanda Cookson, sorry, just chatting in chat then. Hello, everyone.
I cut you off. All right, so Amanda, I'm going to let you introduce our guest today and get us started.
Okay, so before I welcome guests, I'd like to welcome our audience. So it'd be great if people could put in where they've come from, because I think we've got people from all over the world. And what would be lovely is if you could share what kind of conversations you find most difficult, most challenging, because we'll be asking one of our panelists to help with that later. So if you can add that into the chat, and while you're busy chatting away, I will introduce our guests. So we have got AmandaMichelle Echevarria, who is Mish to her friends. So hopefully we're all friends today. And she is all the way from Buenos Aires, Argentina. We then have from America, Evan Roth, who's based in Denver, and Wendy, I don't know why I'm pointing to you, and Wendy, who's in Washington, DC. And then Anne Archer is another Britisher, and she's from Bedford. So welcome to all of our guests. And what I wanted to kind of say about our guests, for those of you kind of joining or thinking, okay, who is this bunch? How did you get together? We all trained in conversational intelligence back in, I think it was 2016. And so part of our training was that we met once a month to practice our kind of learnings and coach each other. And we've continued to meet once a month there or thereabouts ever since. So everyone on our sort of as guests today are all executive coaches, all very, very skilled in the art of conversations and understanding that kind of neuroscience behind it. So I thought I'd start with a really simple question to get us going. So Wendy, I'm going to ask you first, if you were just to see if you could describe in a sentence or more what conversational intelligence is for those people who are listening.
Great, and thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Conversational intelligence was a methodology created by Judith Glaser in the book Conversational Intelligence. And what it is it's really the neuroscience behind how conversations happen and how you move from conversations that are, they're fine, but there's not a high level of trust. And how do you build trust in conversations, and what are the tools and what's necessary to do that? And there's some basic tools that help you connect with people, you prime for trust, you ask certain kind of questions, and that really puts people in a part of their brain that they can co-create, they can build trust and work together even more effectively.
Evan, what would you like to add to that?
Hope you're on mute now.
Pardon me. Wendy described it perfectly well. And maybe the only add that I would have is our conversations really fall on a spectrum. Many of you have experienced this kind of self-protective, ooh, I don't know if I want to share this. I don't know, if I want to be vulnerable. And there's really a protect stance that many people can be in as they start conversations. What we've learned to become skilled in is creating partnering conversations. There's a whole spectrum of tools that can be applied, techniques that can be applied to move from one side of the spectrum to the other that make these conversations much more effective, much more transformational in their nature.
And how about you, Anne? What have you sort of gained from doing conversational intelligence?
I would say, is that a different question about the definition, or what have I gained? Because, oh boy, where would you start? One of the things, though, that's impacted me more than anything else is about these two pillars, if you like, of curiosity and being non-judgmental to enable you to stay in that place of trust. And I think Evan and Wendy have so, beautifully articulated what conversational intelligence is. And it's very much from a place of being still enough to be in that conversation, curious and without judgment. I think that's what I'd add.
Mish, how about you?
The thing that struck me the most with this framework is that most conversations miss the mark, so that people really don't understand what you're saying. And we need to go a little bit further into the conversations to make sure that we understand what people are saying to us and that we are understood. So the embodiment of understanding, that's what got me very interested and what has changed very much in the way I converse and talk to people and listen to people.
Wonderful.
And I love the sort of backup question that Amanda had, which is, so what have you gained from it? Right. So, and maybe we can throw that out to the group here. And, you know, Anne, I think you were going to start with that. So maybe Anne, we'll start with you.
Sure.
What have you gained from
Goodness.
WCIQ?
So without question, this incredible bunch that you're seeing here on the panel, through practice of learning how to express yourself when you're feeling very emotional, and they can be all sorts of different kinds of emotions. I gained the ability to stay with a conversation, even if I was very emotionally connected and emotionally attached. And I think so often, as Mish was saying, conversations miss the mark, and they miss the mark for so many reasons. But if you can learn to stay in the conversation, whatever it is, and I was in a very, very difficult, highly charged emotional relationship, and through practicing and using tools and ways of being in that conversation, I pretty much have any conversation now, and I can stay in it, and just staying with a group of people where you learn to be in such a sense of trust, where it doesn't matter what comes up, and we share our knowledge and our wisdom, and we really co-generate. We practice conversational intelligence every time we meet. So I'm still living it, Ken. I'm still taking it away.
Fantastic. Let's move around. Maybe Wendy, we can ask you as well. So what have you gained maybe personally from this practice?
I've really learned, I think, Evan, and I echo what Anne said. I've got to work with some amazing colleagues around the world. And I really have two things. One is going to sound a little proletariat, but I really learned the power you can build relationships on Zoom and on Facebook Live and through technology, because we are all over the world. So even before COVID, we had established trust and confidence with people I've never met in person. So that's kind of hopeful, I think, as we're in our new normal. But even I think more specifically, I did learn that when am I shutting down in conversations? When am I not at my best? And I'm usually trying to protect myself. I'm in a lower part of my brain. And that was really, really good self-awareness for me personally.
Awesome, thanks. And Evan, maybe we'll move on to you and then to Mish.
You bet. There's chemicals that are secreted in our brains via so many different stimuli. And one of the brilliant concepts that Judith taught us in this methodology was we have red chemicals and we have green chemicals. And these red chemicals are so powerful. There are fight, flight, freeze, appease, and applying that to myself, I now know I've got those chemicals flowing. I now know I need to give myself a break, take a breath. I now know what may be going on for someone else when they have those chemicals flowing. So for me, as coaches, we laugh with one another and occasionally cry with one another, but we are humans. And so we've got to pay attention to ourselves as we're coaching our clients, in addition to paying to what our clients are experiencing. And so this idea of understanding that it's the whole physiology, misuse the word embodiment, those are real learnings for me as well as my interactions with my clients. So the applicability of this information is just beyond compare. I mean, I use it every single day.
Thank you, Evan. So Mish, and we've got two sort of Amandas, but we call our friend from Buenos Aires Mish. So Mish, what has this practice meant to you?
We have the time. This practice has really meant a life-changing mindset. It changed my mindset from understanding how conversations work in my mind and how I am feeling throughout my body when I'm having a difficult conversation. And it goes beyond that and it goes to the not so difficult conversations. I have gone beyond from telling and asking and just exchanging information to transforming my brain as I understand it with making it grow with people like you guys, but with my friends. And I see that, you know, we have a master chef between amongst our invitees today, that are our participants, and people from government offices. And I thank you for being here. But what has changed, and they know it, and you guys know it, is the approach that I have as a human being towards our other human beings, which is so needed in today's world. It was before the pandemic, but we're still going somewhere else. So in being curious and discovering the truth and being honest behind it, that is what has changed in me. And also it healed a lot of things within me as a person, physically and emotionally.
Awesome. And, you know, we've all been in this, and it'd be fair to ask my co-host, Amanda Cookson, what impact has this practice had on you personally?
Thank you. I was reflecting on before I became a coach, and I was leading a team, and I was doing really well, got lots of positive feedback, award-winning department, blah, blah, blah. And we merged with another company, and I had a new leader, and I found I couldn't string a sentence together. Great ideas disappeared. And I didn't understand what had happened. And I thought it was about me. And actually what conversational intelligence has helped me understand is how the way that people behave can then trigger in others a tidal wave of ineffectualness, a drop of understanding, an inability to cooperate, to create, and that just by changing the way that you are, the way you regard others, it completely changes and transforms the nature of the team and the nature of the relationship. So it's been so helpful for me in understanding what happened, but then also in helping others lead in a way that's far more effective and gets better results, because it's transformed awkward, difficult experiences into something that's so much more productive. So I just think it's a gift.
And I'll throw the question to myself too. I think the immediate impact was in helping clients and helping them unpack the interactions that they were having and why some were working and why some weren't. Clearly things were happening that were positive, and then things were just breaking down at other times. And being able to tie that back to the study of neuroscience that I had done just really made sense. And then at a personal level, as I was dealing with my father, who was, fading through dementia, being able to see what was actually really going on, because he was losing some of the verbal ability that he had, but you could still see some of the thinking that was going on, and being able to understand, so what's the emotional driver here? What is happening? What's he really trying to get to? And being able to answer that in him made all the difference in the world. And I think, made his last few months a whole lot easier on him and on the family and on me for sure. So, Amanda, do you want to throw out the question about conversations, and then, or actually, we've got a couple interesting comments in chat here that I noticed that maybe we could throw to the panel too about challenging conversations. Shall we do that? All right. Yeah. So, how has this impacted your ability, I'll throw this to the panel, to deal with challenging conversations, one where there might be some verbal aggression or lies, or where there's strong emotions involved? Many times these are where conversations go wrong. And so how has the understanding of CIQ helped you be able to navigate some of those much more difficult conversations? And maybe we'll throw that. So we'll go to Anne here, I think.
Oh, okay. I'm going to give a client example. I can be absolutely confident that if I hadn't had the experience of really working out what goes on in a really great conversation, I would have had a very, very difficult client situation. The gig didn't go as well as I'd hoped it would. There were lots of different reasons for that. And historically, I probably would have, first of all, thought it was all about me and, I'd done something wrong, but I wouldn't have conversations about it. I would be too bothered by my own judgments and what I was feeling inside. And through understanding how I can have conversations, and through understanding that actually a conversation is a means to understand and to be curious, and to also create the conditions of offering trust in order that you can create trust. Because if you kind of don't go first, you don't get to that result. And the outcome of a conversation where I put my vulnerability right at the edge, and I offered what I was experiencing, and came from a position of trust, we transformed what was a pretty mucky situation into something that actually became a piece of work that we co-created that's still happening now. So I think it's partly about the framing, the framework, the tools, the approaches, but there's also something about how you can stay centered, knowing that it's just a conversation. And if you can create it in the right way, then you can have a conversation about anything. And I've seen some of the chat about, how do you deal with lies and those sorts of things. And again, I think that curiosity and openness, rather than judgment and cynicism, enables you to really change the dynamic.
Awesome. Is there any?
There's a great question that's been put in about colleagues sort of shutting you down, and I think that's really interesting. And I just wondered whether, Mish, you wanted to kind of give some sort of thoughts around how conversational intelligence helps with that.
Well, Nick, let me tell you that you're not alone. All of us still, deal with this kind of conversations and people who always want to shut it down. That is in what we call in conversational intelligence being addicted to being right. And maybe you are too. We still are. We need to work. And that is why I advocate, that conversational intelligence is not a hard skill. Because a lot of people who are in the audience are still having to draw in this world. Their results have to struggle to build their businesses. But it's not about shutting them down. It is about first understanding how the chemistry in your body works, and understanding that you don't need to shut them back up right away. It is sort of like a dance. It takes practice, but it takes your will not to continue that conversation. So Evan was speaking at the very beginning about green neurochemistry and red neurochemistry. And that what means in colors is, green is good, stop is for the red. And when you feel excluded, imagine if you are, in the table, in a negotiating table, and you say, well, Nick, you come over here, you sit over there, and Joe, come over here, sit by me. Your brain is just spiked and says like, no, he's doing it again to me. So what you need to do besides breathing, because this is not a touchy feeling, is understanding that your brain has just shut up because you feel excluded, you feel judged, you feel limited. And in order to do that, you need to understand that the other person might feel like that too. So when you say it's like, hey, Joe, why don't you come sit by me? Or we'll all sit together. The other person feels included. And this, like I said, it's an exercise. This is not magic. This is not the magic response to anything. It is evolving the relationship to where you can sit with your colleague and say, do you really like when we are in a meeting and you shut me up and we have to compete and fight in front of the boss to who has, the best presentation or who has the best results? Why don't we cooperate and get better results for the company? We're, things like that, so that you expand, you share, and you start to discover what unites you with the other person. And that is going to start helping. And I know a lot of you are going to say, yeah, you don't know my boss or you don't know my colleague. No, I don't, but neither do you. And so in order to go beyond and have that conversation, there's a little bit of doses of humility, not silliness, okay? Not putting yourself down. Humility in order to ask the question and ask, how can I be of assistance? How can I help you? How can we co-create? And that, what it does, it is like a balsam for the brain. And then you can start really speaking, because there are 3 levels of conversation. If I tell you what to do and you tell me what to do, it's not a deep conversation. We need to start going through another spectrum and co-create our answers, co-create our results, and then everything is going to improve the relationship, and then you're still going to deliver your results. But it happens when you upregulate, what we call upregulate the good neurotransmitters like adrenaline and dopamine, because when you feel cared for, when you feel included, and it's not difficult. If in human terms, I call it, it's all you need is love, you know? All you need is being there for the other one, and you don't have to love this person, but you need to care for them as a human being. So that is going to improve your relationship. I hope that answers your question, and somebody, Gemas, I think.
Thank you, thank you. There's another question in the chat, which is on a topic that is a really big passion topic for me, because it's something that I really struggle with, and that, Evan, is imposter syndrome. And so I know that this is something that you kind of like working kind of in that field, and I wondered if you could kind of sort of offer some sort of thinking around that kind of difficulty that you have when you need to have a conversation with someone who you perceive to be more senior, more experienced, more important, and there's something that needs to be said, but at the same time there's that feeling that just gets in the way. Can you sort of talk about how perhaps the neuroscience of conversations could help with that?
Happy to. So many of you are familiar with the term imposter syndrome. It comes in different vocabulary in different cultures. Some call it the judge, some call it the gremlin, some call it the imposter. And the interesting thing is it comes in three forms. We judge ourselves, we judge others, and we judge our circumstances. And you get bonus points. You get accomplices that go with it. So it can be partnered with avoider or hypervigilant or all these other things. There's a lot going on in our noggins and with the heads of those that we're interacting with as well. And so part of the reframing, which is what we were taught, both in our coaching schools as well as through conversational intelligence, is to look at the conversation differently. What if, for the senior person, I just didn't look at their stripes, I didn't look at their title, and I simply looked at them as a person? How could I listen to connect with them so that I can explore their world and understand more about what's really there? And I got to tell you guys something special that happened with this group. There is so much I have learned from my colleagues, well outside of conversational intelligence. Several, Ken and Wendy and I remember several brought in this idea of a SCARF model. What's that? There's another guy who promotes this named David Roth, but I'm now looking at what are people's motivations, what causes their fear, and in fact, what causes my fear? So if I can examine that for myself and the person that I'm having the conversation with, regardless of their title, I can now look at them more humanly. I can explore their world, and we have a different connection. And there's even some science that talks about certain neurons pointing towards one another when we have this trusting relationship. That transforms everything. So there's such an opportunity to transform the relationship as I have the conversation.
And I think that issue of status is one that can come up. And Wendy, we've got a question here in the chat that talks about where are the lines, right? And particularly when you're already friends with that coworker, right? It's one thing to build a stronger relationship with somebody, you know, who's just an abstract coworker. But when you've got that friendship layering in there, and then you've got positional things going on, how do you have those conversations, right? So the question exactly was, you know, how can this be helpful in a conversation between an employer and employee who are also friends? If the employee is doing something that isn't productive, or if discrepancies in the books are found, right? So if there's some actual wrongdoing, right? Some performance issues, how can that be turned around to a more productive conversation?
It's a great question coming in the chat, and the friendship piece makes it even more complicated, doesn't it? So if it was just you and an employee, that friendship piece is where there's some heart energy. I think there's two or three things you can do. One is really get some clarity about your role in the friendship, and what is your role? What is your obligation here as a manager? If it's an ethical obligation, if you said there's something that's really a problem, that's something that you have to work through. So I always say in these situations, it's really important to be respected, to be professional, to be kind, but you have to do the right thing as a manager, as a fiduciary of that company. The second technique I would encourage everyone in the audience, again, we're trying to give you some practical tools, is called, ask for questions for which you don't have answers. So you want to ask a lot of questions here where you, and I think Mish said, being addicted to being right, not where you're like, I'm right, I'm asking you a question to prove it, but what was happening with this friend? Why did they, tell me a little bit more. I want to understand why you perceive it this way. How did you decide to move forward with this? What was your thinking? What was your feeling? And you just ask a lot of open-ended questions without judging, just to seek to understand. That will help. And also, again, if you have that kind of trust, you need to have that I'm going to call it a difficult conversation about our friendship versus our working relationship. A lot of times people aren't willing to have that and set some of those guardrails and some of those, I call them swim lanes. But it's a great question. It's hard, it can be done, but just think about your questions. Hope that helps.
Yes, thanks.
Great. I wanted to move on, and Evan, I wanted to just get your sort of thinking around the shifts in leadership and what's going to be required now. And a lot of the things I've been reading about have been sort of saying that we'll probably need to continue social distancing for a while, which means that teams are going to be working remotely. We have all experienced a collective trauma. And as we begin to adjust to our new reality, we're going to have some sort of form of post-traumatic shock, and that there will be a lot more issues around well-being and connection in the workplace. And so the sorts of leaders that were right for us in the past may not be right for us in the future, or in this particular sort of short-term future. And so, Evan, my question for you really is, how can conversational intelligence and that neuroscience and understanding of the brain around conversations help our future leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. It's really a new world of leadership. There's some fabulous materials coming out from think tanks about how we need to lead differently in a global world, in a work from home world, in a virtual world. And I love the brilliance of thought that are shared by my colleagues. We read a lot of stuff, we share a lot of things with each other. I think the themes that are emerging for me are, one, we actually have the ability to collaborate with anyone, anywhere, anytime. With conversational intelligence tools, it just gets enhanced. We begin to, as was mentioned, we ask questions that we don't have an answer for. We listen to connect with people. We double click on something that's mentioned. You hear a sigh on a call, and then you say, hey, what was that sigh about? So we start exploring each other's worlds, and that causes the connection and the trust. We need to lead virtually well. Secondly, I would also say, and others have mentioned it, this idea of co-creating with others is really an opportunity in the new world. We now have more people that we can create with, that we can collaborate with, where we can stimulate innovation and creativity, as well as building bonds with one another where we didn't even have them. We didn't know each other 5 years ago. And look at where we are right here. We practiced this amongst ourselves. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't wait until I hear what Mish or Amanda or Wendy or Ken or anybody has to say. It's just wonderful. So I think we've got this opportunity now to lead differently, to also, and the other thing I think I might mention as well, and again, it was mentioned, this idea of embodiment. We really need to understand that we're whole humans. Anne has done incredible research into mental health. I've learned so much from her about the emotional experience, the mental health experience of people as they have gone through crisis. And as leaders, if we're unaware of that, to your point, Amanda, we will have missed a leadership opportunity. We have to lead the whole person from here on out.
And Anne, I've got to bring you in to kind of carry on the conversation around this. What's your view on the sort of future of leadership?
If I think about where we are now, I think we're seeing the very best of leadership and the very worst of leadership. And where you're having leaders who are coming from a value space and communicating effectively, having great conversations, really showing up in a way that reduces the amount of stress that's in their system, whether it's within their own system, their family system. And this is the lowering of cortisol, which is certainly one of the tenets that we work with with conversational intelligence. What can we do to lower the cortisol, to enable creativity, to enable problem solving? And there are some fabulous examples of how, you know, leaders are able to come out of judgment into that space of allowing and being uncertain and asking the questions to which we don't have the answers. And then we have the leaders that are not doing that. And we're seeing so much tension and so much anger and the rising of cortisol, and oxytocin and serotonin are nowhere to be seen. And that isn't the way that we're going to be able to create this newness, because the reality will be different. And we don't know what it's going to be like. So therefore, for me, leaders who can create the conditions where creativity can thrive, where people can have conversations that ask questions that are difficult, that perhaps hit the elephant in the room and say, let's just understand that. Let's not try and jump to a solution too quickly. And that takes a lot of courage, actually, for a leader, because we want our leaders to know, to tell us what to do all those other things. But actually, listening with that profound sense of value and belief in the human race can really bring about a confidence, actually, and reduce the amount of fear. Like, it's okay to not know, instead of, you know, fighting that feeling. I won't go too much into the mental health side, because I'd really go off on one then.
Maybe that's for another day.
Yeah, maybe.
Wendy, I wonder, Wendy, if you could just sort of bring in some of your thoughts around that neuro leadership and that whole concept of humanizing bosses and leadership, and bringing more of your humanness into work.
Yeah, I love this question. I've been thinking and journaling and reading a lot about not only what's happening in COVID, but what's going to happen beyond COVID. And I feel everyone on this call, all of us, the leaders, your most senior leaders, whether they be in your companies or organizations or think tanks, no one knows. So what I've been thinking about is we all have to be futurists. We all have to be strategy consultants. We have to be the McKinsey consultant coming in and thinking about the future, because what kind of future do you want for your families, for your companies, for your consulting firms? Like, what do you know, you've got to start designing the future now. And part of that is that humanity. How do I want to show up? So a lot of my clients are saying, look, I tended not to talk about people's personal lives, but I'm asking, how are you coping? And I'm respecting, as a leader, you have to show empathy. You have to be kind. You have to be a good listener. These skills now are needed now more than ever. And that's not going away. There's only going to be more of that. So think like a futurist. There's some good that's going to come out of this. I don't know what it is. New businesses, new relationships. People are thinking about their values, the value of health, family, what's important to them. There's some positive things that will come out of this situation, our new normal. Are you prepared for it? How do you want to lead? And by the way, even if you're not leading a team, you're leading your family. You're leading yourself. So there's some deep work going to happen here that's going to humanize us all, because this virus is everywhere around the world. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, if you're rich, or you're just, you know, a homeless person. We are all vulnerable, and it's this humanity, I think, that's going to get us through.
How about you, Ken? What's your view on this?
You know, this is one of those double-edged sword situations where we have been advanced, I think, years ahead in things that were sort of naturally, organically happening anyway. So, you know, easily the technology side of things. I, up until, you know, a few months ago, had clients who were dealing with senior managers who could not understand the concept of how someone could be productive and not be sitting in a chair in their office. It just was beyond them, right? So to now not only have experience of that, be forced into it, right, has changed minds. Technology is starting to catch up. And I think that's what we're seeing. There's the leading edge is on technology. The back edge is on the human piece of it. We haven't figured out how to have these new relationships. And like as Wendy was saying, you know, like the piece of checking in, how are you doing, right? I think it devolves us a bit, right? So we were at work at a level of proficiency, maybe even say, you know, expert or mastery. And this has knocked us back down to beginner, right? Or sort of journeyman. And we're having to relearn the skills of work a bit. If you've been working for a while, this is going to be really disconcerting, I think. You know, if you're 50 years old or older like me, you know, this is going to be something that's going to make you feel like completely inadequate. Like I haven't felt like this since my 20s, right? Because yes, the environment has actually changed. And I'm leery with the language of, you know, back to normal, new normal. I think this has been such a paradigm shift, such a shift of environment, that I'm worried about the structures that we are bringing with us from the past that no longer apply. Certainly, many do. Being empathetic, setting clear expectations, communicating, you know, all of the stuff, all of the things that good leaders did before, I think they still need to do. Maybe they need to do them more and maybe slightly differently. But I think that this human edge is what's really required. And, you know, as we come back to work, because we will eventually, there's a real need to figure out how to help teams, or how to help your teams, if you're a leader, reinitialize, you know, how to reboot in what is now the new circumstances you find yourself in, and take the good that has worked in the past, and be open to figuring out and co-creating, you know, what the new pathway forward is.
Thanks. There was a very quick question I had for Mish. So one of the clients that I'm working with has said that they're finding it really difficult to have conversations about poor performance whilst they're all at home. And the thing that they're really struggling with is that in the office, if you have a challenging conversation with somebody, you can sort of check in with the person, see what their demeanor is, see how they're doing later on. But when you're doing it online, you're kind of saying, I paraphrase, your work sucks, you know, improve it. And then you're kind of leaving them to kind of struggle on with it. And so what they've been doing is avoiding having challenging conversations. And I just wonder, Mish, if you have a few pointers that you would like to share that might help with that specific scenario.
Absolutely, Amanda. And I'm seeing that that's the concern of some of our participants today, having difficult conversations, dealing with lies in the workplace, or having to have difficult conversations because they're not following procedure in a program in 40 countries. But this is all virtual. But the thing that I see is that it is very important to understand that behind these screens, they're still humans. We are still humans. Okay, so what Ken said about that we have advanced because we had gone virtual because we're home. I love this concept of first regulating yourself before going that, because there's still going to be people who you do not agree with, and people who don't know how to give feedback because they never had. And what makes you think that they're going to learn behind the screen? So if you are the person that you're getting the feedback and you're not satisfied and you are not, and you feel terrible and your brain just feels terrible about what your boss or the person said, these difficult conversations need to happen in the partner side of your brain. How does that happen? It's like, hey, you know, we're under pressure because everybody who's in this call is probably under more pressure than we have ever been. Yes, we're home, but we're probably working more hours because we're home, and the time that we're not commuting, we're using. So very quickly to go to the partner, from understanding how you react, understanding how you can down-regulate yourself, calming down. And in layman's terms, you need to calm down before going back to your boss or leader or this person who you need to have the difficult conversation and say, hey, I need to ask you these questions. I need more feedback. I am not really clear on what you said. I need to go through the process again because you're giving advice and this is not what is in the process. I need you to follow the process because we're partners here. And then you turn from the I to we, and you're partnering with that person and what you're doing in that conversation. You lied to me and I don't like it. So please don't do it again. They might do it again, but you are acting on what's not good for you and you're down-regulating what's hurting you, what's not making you perform to the best of your abilities. And then if that continues, the relationship will improve. So that's how I would advise people or coach people to say, you know, work on the procedures, but first of all, understand that you're still humans and they're still going to have, to make mistakes. But the beauty of conversational intelligence is that it's not a fad. It is the center of what the skills that are going to be needed in the future that we're talking about.
Thanks, Mish. Anne, I wanted just to ask you a question about listening. So, you know, many times when we talk about conversation, I think we naturally go to, so what are we going to say, right? What's coming out of us? And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what's coming in. So I wonder if you could speak about the power of listening deeply and how that can impact the relationship and in fact actually build it and help create some safety just through the fact that you're listening more deeply.
Of course. I think the way to answer this is probably to get you all to think about a time when you were profoundly listened to, and just give yourself a few moments to really think about what was going on for you when you were being listened to. How did you feel? What happened within you? And the gift of being listened to in a completely non-judgmental way, where the intention of the listener is to really just be alongside and then really hear what you have to say. It's profound. And if you don't believe me, then find someone to practice with, because there's something that happens to our very essence of being, and Mish was talking about that, which is so core to this work, which is about, I'm really with you, I'm really hearing you, I might not agree with you, I might not understand you, but I want to. And when you're in that place, something happens to the tension and the fear and the anger and the emotion, and it starts to become a possibility for a conversation. Whereas when we're not listening, when we're not listened to, we know, you know, we're all sensing beings, and if somebody isn't listening to us, we get it, and it undermines us, or it makes us angry, or it attaches to our fear or our anger. So therefore, at the heart of this is, my intention is to see you and hear you. I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to find a solution. I just want to understand. And above all, I really want to connect and possibly go beyond connecting to kind of co-generating something, to co-creating something with you. So back to the feedback, right? I've done something wrong. I'm feeling a bit of shame, a bit of vulnerability. If in that conversation we can talk about that as well as what happened, I can learn, I can grow, I can move instead of getting locked down. So for me, that ability to be fully present in that listening moment. Just really think about who's listened to you and how did it feel, and then give that gift to others. And it really can transcend conversations that you have.
Fantastic.
So, Anne, I'm just thinking for people with us here and also on Facebook, that sometimes listening is seen as not talking, but it's more than that. So if I was growing in my skills as a listener, what one tip or thing could I do to help me be a better listener?
What a beautiful question. And for me, fundamentally, to spectacular listening. And I have had feedback that it's a superpower of mine, so I'm really proud of that. It's an ability to find yourself kind of very present. And what I mean by that is you've been able to create a stillness in your mind. So that that's going on in your mind, that's kind of feeding in, you've stilled it. And by setting yourself up in advance to be in that moment, perhaps by taking some rhythmic breathing with a thinking about it being a rhythm and smooth, and just being there in that moment with your attention on the person in front of you, when you can guide yourself to that place, listening actually becomes easy because your intention and your focus is on the other person. It's not on your chatter, and it's not on your solutions. So my encouragement would be to find that center and that place of stillness, because then you're there for the other person. And I actually think that's really at the nub of it. It's about really being with that other person with your attention on it.
Gorgeous. And it is a superpower of yours, Anne. So I think that's a gift that we can all start practicing. We are coming close to the hour. I don't know quite where the time has gone. But what I would love is if each of you could think about perhaps one simple thing that people could do starting tomorrow that would improve relationships at work through conversation. So Wendy, I'm going to start with you and then move to Evan.
So I think I said it before, think about the quality of the questions you ask your colleagues, your friends, your loved ones, and ask questions which you just don't have answers, that you just go with that spirit of curiosity and to learn. Put yourself in a learning mode. That will help a lot. So really open-ended questions are beautiful.
I would follow what Wendy said with a tool that we learned all together was something called the ladder of conclusions. I don't know that it was proprietary to Judith Glaser, but there's been other forms of it. I can create a story about anyone, anytime that has little basis in facts. So the reminder is that I really, we're taught as coaches, be the participant and observer in your own experience. So if I can observe what I might be concluding about Amanda or Ken in this moment, to Anne's point, reserve judgment, just be there, I'm going to be in a much better spot. And we learned a term as well called reality gaps. So I can collapse the reality gap between my reality, between Ken and Amanda, by examining what I believe, what's the fact, what's going on there, to Wendy's comment of asking questions of myself. Wow, can that ever help? So my encouragement to our participants here would be, ask yourself, what story am I telling myself about this situation? And sit with it for a moment, to Anne's point, breathe a little bit and see what answer you get. And my guess is you, like me, have storied it up a little bit further than it needed to be, and we can get back to the reality of what we're actually dealing with.
Gorgeous. Mish, how about you?
Well, if the question is about going away from this webinar and saying, how can I be more conversational intelligence savvy? It's to ask the next person you meet, or today, how are you? And they're gonna say, oh, I'm fine, I'm hanging in there. And then ask the question, how are you really? And go a little bit further, because everything happens through conversations. That's going to make a difference. And then you get to share how you are doing really. And so if we match our thoughts, and there's like, no, I'm not doing that great, I feel a little cooped up or whatever, then they feel safe enough to tell you a little bit more and build up on that story. So then you can go to processes, to results, but then you have asked that questions, and you can do that right away after you finish this webinar.
For me, I think the thing that is a really simple thing to do is to, whenever you have a conversation, come at it with openness and curiosity. So one of the diagrams that we learned was how judgment and criticism and I'm trying to think of the other words, sort of just start to trigger behavior that is really unhelpful. And quite often when we have conversations that go horribly wrong, it's because we are judging the other person. We are thinking that they need to do what we say because we're right, and what they're doing is clearly wrong and needs to stop. Whereas if we stay in that space of discovery and just being very open and from a space of understanding, then I think that just helps for things to unfold. And quite often, I find for myself and for my clients I work with, that story, as Evan mentioned, that we tell ourselves about what's going on for the other person isn't actually happening. And so staying in that space of curiosity, you learn so much more about the other person, and in that space of trust, you end up in a much better place. Ken, how about you? What little tool would you add?
Our brains are our greatest attribute, and they're our worst enemy at the same time. I'm reminded about the statistic about how many words we typically speak. From my part of the US, maybe it's a little higher, but most folks speak around 150 words a minute. But we can process upwards of 500 words a minute. So the difference between 500 and 150 leaves us some extra brain power. And inevitably what happens in that gap with that extra brain power is we start to leap ahead of where we actually are. And like Evan was saying, we start to put together a story, or we start to write a script. We start to make assumptions about where the conversation's going. And I think that's where things can go wrong. So being able to, sort of put the brakes on, drive a little more slowly, and allow the conversations to unfold, be present in that moment, and truly hear what that other person is saying. Then, really apply our brains, right? But not let our brains get ahead of us that puts us in a bad place, right? So always keeping a brake on that. So Amanda, do we want to have any other last question? There's one last question here. Let's see. I don't think there's one more question. Maybe we can throw that out.
Trauma.
Quick.
Yes. So it was the question about, is there something we could do to turn trauma that people are experiencing into growth rather than stress? So that was kind of how you turn the negative into the positive, was the only question that we have left open, which is a really big question.
Yeah, so
can I just come in here very quickly from a really short and sharp, just a little bit of a red flag when we use the term trauma, because there are traumatic events that can create high levels of stress, and many of us will have experienced those. And then there are trauma that deeply affects the structures of the brain. And I think we perhaps just need to recognize that they are separate and different. And so that's, really just something we always just need to be a little bit cautious when we use the term trauma. Are we meaning highly stressed about this circumstance, or somebody who actually needs maybe a therapist or deep work because of their trauma? So
and I've just got Anne as well, someone's put in the chat, we didn't ask you what your one thing, your quick, one thing that somebody could do tomorrow.
Oh gosh, okay. I thought I was done very quickly. I would say, because you guys have covered listening and questioning, and I think that's marvelous. I would say this little chemical called cortisol can get in our way, and if it's around a lot, and it's been in our systems for several months now, and it's probably going to be in our systems for months to come. And it raises the level of stress, and it can do all sorts of damage to our thinking and our way of being. So I would encourage you to go out and find ways that you can reduce your own cortisol levels, and you can Google it because there's loads of information about how you can do that. And also think about, are you reducing or increasing somebody else's level of cortisol? Because if you can start to learn to reduce somebody else's, you can also find the way into great conversations. That's my very quick one.
Great.
Fantastic.
That's perfect, Anne. I think we can't top that, can we, Ken?
I can't. So we want to thank our guests today, Anne, Evan, Mish. Wendy, thank you all for joining us here on Zoom, and for everyone who listened in on the Leaders in Conversation Facebook group. Next week, we're going to talk to Bella Abrams, a leading woman in tech, about what leadership looks like in the online space and why people are so important to strategy. As Sheffield University's IT director, she and her team, in response to the whole COVID-19 pandemic, transitioned over 30,000 students and 8,000 staff into an online delivery mode within 3 days, which is just stunning. Tickets are going to be available for Zoom and also through Eventbrite. And of course, you can listen to us on the Leaders in Conversation Facebook group. And I want to thank our panelists, our guests for being here today, for all of our attendees and all of your questions. Thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks, Ken and Amanda. Great for doing it. Thank you for bringing us all together.
You're very welcome.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So fun.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Stay curious.
Take care all.